Welcome to this introduction. First, we will be looking at the lesson plan. We have 20 lessons in all covering the SDK. The first lesson is SDK in context. There we will be discussing questions like what we use the SDK for and what the SDK is not used for. Put it into context, especially with reference to config tools as well. Config tools is a set of tools that also does development, helps you do development. So question is, there is some overlap between the SDK and the config tools. And we'll be discussing also why we'll be using the SDK in some circumstances over the config tools and vice versa. In Chapter 2, we will discuss in high level the development environment setup, the steps needed to set up a workstation to do development, and its basic configuration. Lesson 3, we will be looking at the Eclipse IDE, the tool primarily used for creating customizations within the SDK, and show the steps that are needed to code and compile and deploy the code. In Chapter 4, Lesson 4, we will be looking at our user setup process example. This is an example that has been built using the SDK, and we have a working example, and we'll be using it throughout the course, and this is an introduction to the overall example. In lesson number 5, creating entities, we will show how we can create new persistent data entity and create a service around that so that the application can use it. In order to use it, it's normally referred to as a maintenance object within the application. In lesson number 6, change handlers, we'll be looking how you create the basic defaulting and validation that are needed for entities, and this is separate from BO validation, and all entities have some basic change handlers, and we'll be looking to see what those are and how they work. In lesson number 7, we'll be looking at how within code you work with entities, how you create, update, delete entities, and we'll be showing some examples. In lesson number 8, we will be showing how you actually work within code with business objects. You can manipulate data not only directly with the entities themselves, but also with the BO, and will be similar to config tools, and we'll be showing you how you do that. In lesson number 9, we were looking how you deal with queries within the SDK, how the syntax to create queries, and there's different ways of doing it. We'll be looking in lesson number 10 at working with messages, how you work with sending messages from the application as pop-ups for warnings and errors, and how you code those. And in lesson number 11, we're looking how you integrate lookups, both framework, base, and custom lookups within your code. All these chapters working with entities, business objects, and queries and messengers, basic lessons 7 to 11. It's really a work up to examples which we have from lesson number 12 onwards. BO info example, we'll be looking at an example of actually creating a string and info string, and we'll be using many of the techniques and patterns that we've seen, coding patterns that we've seen in the earlier chapters. So the first example will be a BO info example. Then we'll be doing a validation example and seeing the code itself and what it does within the actual example, the user setup process. In lesson 14, we'll be looking at a few different status enter examples to create new users, to create to-dos, and to create the actual user itself. As enter US BO status enter example. So there's 3 of those. Then in lesson number 15, we'll be looking at a monitor example and checking to see for a completed to-do. And in lesson number 16, we'll be seeing how you can incorporate within code calling a business service, and we'll be seeing how you can call a business service that creates a to-do or creates a log. In lesson number 17, we will show how within Code you can create your own new business service as a service that can be used in other code or can be used in config tools, and we will show you the steps that are needed in order to create that business service. In lesson number 18, we will create our own new plugin spot, and this will be done to further update the validation of the user setup process, and again, all the steps will be described. In lesson number 19, we will show how you can create a multi-threaded batch process. And finally, in lesson 20, we will be doing an overview of JUnit testing, how to test and run different types of Java modules.